Welcome back to the Scarlet Faithful podcast. I am your host and co-founder, Aaron Brightman, coming to you on the night that Noah Fernandes, UMass transfer, committed to Rutgers basketball. Huge addition for the program. And there was no better person that I wanted to talk to and get insight on his time at UMass and find out more about what Rutgers is getting than Curry Hicks Sage, longtime UMass fan, and really the best source on Twitter for UMass basketball, and want to welcome him in now. Thanks so much for being here.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate the introduction.
So obviously, big news today with Noah Fernandes going to Rutgers. A lot to unpack. First, I just kind of wanted to ask you in terms of the process of him leaving UMass. I'm sure you've had some time to kind of process that news and your kind of take on him leaving and taking that next step now in his last season in terms of searching to play for a high major.
Yeah, always knew it was a possibility, especially once Matt McCall was fired at the culmination of the 2021-2022 season and Frank Martin came in. I just think that in general, it's not at all uncommon, particularly in this era with the portal, for guys to, go under a new coach, and it's just, they decide, it's not their guy and they play a little differently. And I don't think that was totally at play here necessarily, but it certainly contributed. I mean, he wasn't recruited to come here to play under Frank Martin. And I think as we see it tons of places, there's no harm in that. And given that I believe he's graduated, and had three solid years here, after one at Wichita, which also, interestingly, I think that was the year there that ended with when Greg Marshall left. So, around all that controversy. So he's kind of been on the short end of two coaching changes in his career. And, I think that given his 1 year of eligibility remaining, it's not really surprising that he's taking his talents to Central Jersey.
So in terms of that, this past season, obviously he only played 11 games. He had that ankle injury, kept him out the last 2 months of the season. The year before he had a tremendous year, in terms of his role leading UMass and, points, assists, steals. I think 37th nationally in assist rate that year. What was really kind of his evolution as a player at UMass, and I guess how much did his role or kind of the way he was utilized transition at all from McCall to Martin?
Well, to some extent, Noah was used a little bit differently in all three of his seasons, and partly that was a function of, his first year, the team only played 15 games because of the COVID year. So, and that year they had a pretty dynamic freshman point guard who was kind of a kid named Javon Garcia, who showed flashes, struggled at other times, but as freshmen do. But Noah played a little bit off the ball that year. They both played point guard, but it was at times it was a little bit of like either could bring the ball up, and that was intriguing at times. And I actually really liked Noah off the ball. I think we could get more into it. I think, to assume that he's just because of his height, that he's just sort of a pure point guard, is kind of inaccurate. I think Noah, I'm very intrigued to see whether Pike will put him in actions where he can kind of get downhill and, create off the dribble, which he can do. And rather than just kind of creating one-on-one out in the half court in a sort of more traditional point guard dynamic. So I would just note, going back to your original question, pardon the digression, that for the first year he played a little bit of both. And then the second year he was very much, that was McCall's last year, and he was very clearly the best player on that team. And he was kind of a ball dominant point guard because he had to be, and a high volume shooter and scorer who shot the ball a lot on a team that, didn't really have much in terms of post presence and played a lot of 4-out stuff and Noah was just kind of able to cook. And I think, McCall was cool with that. Garcia played a lot less that year for a variety of reasons. But that was like the Noah as the guy year, if you will. And then this year, Noah was kind of the guy in the early going, but Frank Martin had brought in a good deal of talent, and the way Frank Martin tends to play, his teams tend to play like really at the beginning of the year, 10, 11 guys. Nobody really I think Noah did lead the team in minutes when he was playing at just shade over 30. But they had a kid named Matt Cross who transferred from Louisville, and a really good freshman who's now himself since transferred out. They had a lot of pieces who were kind of in the 8 to 13 range, Noah being the leader, but it was a little less the Noah show, which it was definitely the final year under McCall. There was more balance on the roster, at least at the point when Noah was healthy. So he had his moments, and definitely was the leader when he was healthy, but then he endured a really bad ankle sprain, tried to come back, played a bit, and then shut it down again for good. So he really only played, you may have alluded to it, I can't recall, but I don't know, 11, maybe 13 games in total for the year. So I would say that, and his first year at UMass during the pandemic year, he played only, the team only played 15 games. So we only got one true full year of Noah, but then in sort of half of 2 other years, we saw slightly different Noahs regardless. So I think it'll be just an interesting so it's not to say that his game evolved. I just think we saw different iterations of Noah Fernandes throughout his career based on a variety of circumstances, coaches, injuries, pandemics, style of play, and all the rest.
That's very interesting because just speaking of the situation that he's now going into at Rutgers, I really like his addition because I think that the backcourt now has a lot of versatility. They're all different. Cam Spencer is a knockdown shooter, better defensively than I expected, but just a natural shooter, elite. Then you have Derek Simpson, who really could get downhill at the end. He's a little bit taller, 6'3", but still learning. Not as efficient near the rim, and needs to develop a jump shot. Where I feel like Fernandes, just with the 2 of those guys, I feel like the 3 of them could really work well together and offer different strengths that could kind of make them all better, if that makes sense, in terms of how they kind of play off of each other.
Yeah, I have seen some Rutgers. I'll be candid. The offense there became difficult to watch for me at a certain point this past year.
Difficult for everyone.
I would text Danny Breslauer, who I'm sure you know, and at times and say, like, I just can't watch this right now. I said that I recall saying that during the Michigan game. And let's be clear, UMass was not exactly, the Frank Martin kind of 2 bigs plotting, late 90s style. That's not totally fair. They play fast at times, but it's not exactly like, we were running the most spectacular offense in the world. And yet I tuned into a couple of those Rutgers games and I was like, I got to turn this off, man. But no, I mean, I think that Noah will help any offense flow, right? Yep. However you want to define that. And he can create off the dribble. He can score it. I'm really intrigued by him playing at Rutgers and not having to be the guy, because I think Noah is at his best when he's a little bit more efficient, can catch and shoot, doesn't have to go off. Noah will find a seam and he can be a spectacular one-on-one takeover scorer, but I actually like his game more when he could just catch and bury a 3 or go off the dribble. it'll be just really interesting to see how you guys use him, because you can use him a lot of different ways despite his size, on the offensive end.
Well, that's what's intriguing about him to me. And you know, you were talking about uh in terms of how he kind of played within the UMass offense. And like I look at him just from film I've watched, I feel like, you know, he's the kind of guy that can make something out of nothing, you know, in terms of when the offense breaks down, you know, he can create something. Either he create a shot for himself or he can he can create space for teammates. And he just seems like the kind of guy that is exactly what a stagnant Rutgers offense, you know, last year they when, you know, they needed a spark. He feels like he's to me, he just pops off the screen for as a Rutgers fan to see just the bounce he plays with, and how he's just constantly, you know, his action, he's constantly active, and just the motions that how quick he is with the ball, and how hard he works to get shots off. It's just, yeah, for me, I'm super excited to see him play.
He's a great competitor. He's a great kid. Um, he loves the ball in big moments. I would love to see a data point on this. I don't know if you quantify it, but I'm sure you can. But there was a number of games, particularly this past season when he was playing, where it felt like he scored so many more points in the second half once teams had a little bit of foul trouble, because he kind of is one of those guys who it feels like he sometimes will take kind of, he'll look for a seam and finally find it and exploit it. And when teams are in foul trouble, he becomes really, really hard to guard, because there's a lot of like kind of subtle dipsy do up fakes that draw guys a little off balance, and he'll get to the line. And when teams can't foul, and you know, when they're in a tougher spot down the stretch, it feels like that's when he's really at his best, because if you give him space, he's really hard to stop. You know, I do think probably earlier in games in particular, and this will be more true in the Big Ten, teams are going to try to body him and impose physicality on him. And there will be times where, you know, especially when teams aren't in foul trouble, that will probably pose some challenges. But once the game opens up a little, Noah can be a real takeover guy. I mean, he single-handedly, in one of the better performances I've seen in some time, the final game of Matt McCall's tenure, which was the quarterfinals against Dayton in 2022, Noah finished with like 27. It felt like you had about 40. And I don't know how many were in the second half, against a really good Dayton team. And UMass was like just so thoroughly outmanned in terms of talent in that game. And Noah just single-handedly, play after play, like you felt like you were watching Trae Young for a moment. You know, he can have those performances for sure. And that Dayton team had, you know, was very comparable, I think, to middle of the pack Big Ten team. And I don't think he'll be fazed by that at all.
Yeah, I mean, Atlanta 10, you know, is really, I think, balanced league, and I did a reaction earlier today, and I was comparing the fact that there is precedent for really small, quick guards that come from, you know, and obviously the A10 is a mid major, but you know, Mike Smith came from Columbia, 5'11", and you know, really was a huge difference maker for Michigan a couple years ago. You know, obviously Tyson Walker from Northeastern, now at Michigan State. So Noah, to me, you know, is kind of coming with even more experience than those guys had. And, you know, he's a grad transfer, but also just he's excelled in a tougher league. And I feel like he just brings a ton of experience, and he seems like a very high IQ type of player that, you know, we kind of touched on, and how he can learn how to, he can find the weakness in the second half and how to break teams down.
Well said. You know, he's a really good kid. He's very well liked by everyone at UMass. I think most of the you always have a couple fans who, I think the fans are a little bit relieved that he didn't sign at Boston College. That was a real relief. So I think, and there's a, you know, I mean, I'll definitely. I live in New York City, so I'll definitely get to. I plan to get to the rack next year. Really nice family. He just had a kid with. I think she was a UMass cheerleader, and they were kind of like, they were well known around campus and well liked and involved, and like he's a Pike type of dude. I think in terms of his character, and I think you guys will like him a lot as a fan base. And I think, Noah, I think he loves to win. And I think, there were some different things at the UMass that made that a little challenging in his time here. And I think he'll be ready to go. I also think he'll be, by that point, I think at this point, he probably is close to full strength. So I think you guys, there's probably some durability concerns given his injuries over the years, but I don't think you guys have to play him 33 minutes, and that will benefit him. And I think he can actually put up comparable numbers in 20, 22, 23 minutes as he did in 33. And I think that will actually allow him to be even more effective defensively because he won't have to bear that load on the offensive end at Rutgers.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, yeah, he's a pretty efficient player, offensive rating anywhere from 109 to 112 the last 3 years. And that would definitely be towards the high side on Rutgers for what they've had in recent years. And I think you're right. I mean, I think it's going to be fascinating to see how Pike works the rotation. Obviously, some more decisions coming, and Paul Mulcahy, I think, if you had to guess right now, I'd say he is going to return, but we don't know for sure. But I think the four of them, they all, they give. I think they'll be tough for opponents to prepare for because I think that they can all find their spots and all have big moments. And I think that, they're going to play closer to 25, maybe close to 30. But that's also been a big problem with Rutgers is that, especially this year, all their starters are playing 32, 33 minutes, and they just wore down at the end. And I think that that's also kind of part of the plan is having a backcourt where they could really rotate and keep them fresh. And I think, 25 to 30 minutes between, is going to be definitely riding the hot hand in certain games. But I think it'll be interesting to see how, they're all kind of utilized together. And I think, he seems like a guy that is smart enough and kind of effective enough in his skill set that he could still be a big factor, even if he's playing less minutes.
I think he may actually be more of a factor playing as counterintuitive as that might sound. I just think that he can be better on both ends. I think Rutgers Pike demands so much defensively out of kids that it becomes hard, I think, to play 30 something minutes and then go out and score too. And the more depth you guys have, the better it will be for Noah because I think he will be more active on both ends if he's not playing 35, 36 minutes as he had to at times, particularly in the 2021, 2022 season. So last year. But yeah.
Well, so I wanted to ask you about that because, I wanted to know about him on the defensive end. I know it's not his strong suit, but he does seem like, with his quickness and that it could be pretty disruptive at times in terms of steals, which obviously would fit into kind of Rutgers' aggressive style and pressuring the ball. And I was curious what your thoughts are in terms of, because I think also Pike probably is looking at it. And he's an offensive guy, but I think he's very confident in his system and his scheme ability to be able to get the best out of Noah as a defender.
So Noah had a really good rep as a defender in high school, if memory serves. He played at a powerhouse prep, Woodstock Academy in Connecticut, and with like 11 D1 kids. So interestingly, there probably played fewer minutes than he did at UMass. They were loaded. Team had like Trey Mitchell, who's now at West Virginia and also was at Texas and was at UMass. Had Ronnie DeGray, who's at UMass in Missouri. Had just a ton of dudes. And I recall that he was really pretty highly regarded defensively coming out of high school. I don't. He was a bit injured at Wichita State in year one, so I don't quite remember there. But he is more than capable of being not just a solid defender, but a good defender. I think at times he didn't. I think he didn't stand out defensively at UMass, and I attribute that in part to the amount of minutes he was getting. I just think what was being asked of him offensively made it such that he was not quite as relentless on the defensive end, but he can pressure the hell out of the ball. And he can jump a passing lane, get steals. He can be very active. Look, he's small, and there's been some durability issues over the years. And if you've got a 6'4", 6'4", 6'5" wingman who's backing him into the post, like that's going to be challenging at times, right? But I would not in any way describe him as a defensive liability. It's not like he stands out as a poor defender. I just would say his offensive game is where his strengths lie.
Yeah, it's almost like a consistency thing where if the load is a little bit lighter on offense, he could pick some up on defense.
Yeah, I also think, look, like Pikel's going to push him, in terms of that end of the floor. And from what I understand about Pikel's and his system is like you're not going to see as much of the floor if you don't get it done on that end. So, right. And Noah's eternally coachable, and I think he will respond accordingly, right? I also think there's a way sometimes in which kids who are in their fifth year have been around the block a few times, and especially kids with the maturity and poise of a Noah just kind of rise to that occasion. They find a way of rising to it. Does it mean he's going to be, second team all league deep defensive team? Probably not. But like, I don't think that you guys are going to be, like losing your minds over him. Just like, he's not going to be caught, just not defending. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. And how much did you know just about his search in terms of once he entered the portal? Obviously, we knew it was reported he was supposed to visit Butler this coming weekend. Obviously, that's not happening. It seemed like a lot of high majors were inquiring about him. I guess what do you know about that part of the process, and why do you kind of any insight on why you think Rutgers was ultimately where he decided to come?
That's a good question. I mean, I've it's such a crazy time of year now, and there's so many kids to track, and I wasn't deeply immersed. I think BC and Providence were pretty actively engaged. Yeah. I think Butler at one point was pretty engaged. I've heard. I think I maybe heard Creighton was thrown around. I heard a lot of places. You know how that goes, though. It's so fluid now with kids visiting and who's, it can depend on so many things. I think, look, Rutgers has a lot to offer right now. It's NIL situation. My understanding is it's very solid. I'm sure that played a role. I don't know that it was necessarily the determinative, most determining factor, but I'm sure it can't hurt. It's relatively close to his folks. He's a Massachusetts kid, so it's not, going halfway across the country or whatever. It is, if in fact the Providence and BC things are to be believed, it's a bit of a coup that they landed him, given the proximity of where he's from. He's from the eastern part of Massachusetts, kind of on the water, I think, and not terribly far from Providence or Boston. So that was good. I don't know. I mean, I think Noah is a mature kid with good support, and I think that he probably weighed this in a very healthy way, and all the factors I think went into it, and I think he wants to. I genuinely think he wants to win, and Rutgers has been in the tournament in the last couple of years. I also think, playing time is going to be there for him. So I think it just makes sense for any number of reasons. I don't know all the specifics of exactly what informed his decision, but there's a lot to like about where the Rutgers program is right now. And Peichel, has just a really good reputation around the sport. And I think Noah's not averse to hard coaching. He initially signed with Greg Marshall, and he was under Frank Martin, so I don't think he'll be fazed by the demands that Peichel puts on him.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think, with Peichel, I think there's a balance there. I think he's demanding, but he's very much, cares about his players. I don't know if you saw the press conference when the season ended with their loss in the NIT, and he was up there with Caleb McConnell and Paul Mulcahy, and it was really remarkable in terms of just the emotion that came out and kind of the end of the guard of that core group that turned the program around, and the emotion that Peichel displayed, which you really don't get to see a lot. And, I think that I actually wrote the next day that I felt like that was like the greatest recruiting pitch he could have made to anyone, because while he does have a reputation of, being, defense first and, demanding on that end, I do think that he really treats them like people, and,
Peichel's a super real dude. I mean, I've been an admirer of his for some time and always thought he was criminally overlooked during his Stony Brook years because he couldn't win that league for a while, and so people weren't giving him a shot. But he's a terrific coach, and he seems, like demanding and tough, but he's a regular dude. Like, he's not. I would describe him as devoid of the performative streak that you see in a lot of other coaches around the country. Quite frankly, he doesn't. His shtick is not shtick, right? It's like, this is his philosophy. This is how he does things, but it's not like he's not trying to show everyone how much he does, or that he's the toughest guy in the room or whatever. He's just a professional who loves hoops. And I think that sound and likes kids. And I know that sounds, like, shouldn't you like basketball and shouldn't you like kids if you're a basketball coach? Well, I got to tell you, not everybody around the country is that way. You guys are pretty lucky to have him. I know, offensive woes at the end of last year notwithstanding, if you take a look at where Rutgers is now compared to where it's been at any other point in the last 3 decades, I think pretty much anyone in the country would take those results under Peichel.
Yeah, that's very well said in terms of kind of nailing his persona. And I laugh because, people get tired of. I mean, he beats the Big Ten as the best league in the country to death. But people think it's like I think he just generally believes it, and he doesn't say it as like a cover or anything. He just really believes it, and people get tired of it. But it's I just think it's just him.
Yeah, I happen to believe that right now the Big East is the best league in the country, but more power to him for believing that. But yes, yeah. I hear you.
All right, so that was really good insight on Noah. I think all Rutgers fans are excited about him, and I hope that, I think his potential, if he could stay healthy, if he can, kind of the chemistry works the way I think it can, I really think he's primed for a big season.
Yeah, and I think fans will like him. He'll embrace the fans. He'll thrive in the rack when it's rocking. Noah loves a big moment. And he was always super, just a really good kid in terms of his appreciation for our fan base, which at the moment is not as robust as yours. And always was like, I remember he was on a Twitter Spaces with someone, and they asked him about, UMass Twitter and he was like, look, we're in New England and people have really high expectations. We have a lot of pro teams that have won championships, and I love that, and he really took it in stride, where I think sometimes you find one, a couple obnoxious comments here and there on the internet, and kids all of a sudden kind of do the whole, like, you don't know what I'm going through. And, like, not that there's not some truth in that at times, but, there's a little shtick that sometimes kids will do. Noah, like, loved the moment, loved the passion, never, resisted it, never complained about it. So I think he He's going to be well liked there, and you guys will just. He's just a he. Not his first rodeo.
That's great insight. Really appreciate it. But before I let you go, I know you do you have a show where you talk about the national coaching searches, and you can give details on that. But I had to ask you before you left, just in terms of your take on Carl Hobbs going to Georgia Tech, longtime assistant under Pike at Rutgers, and who you foresee as potential candidates moving forward to replace him.
One is nearby at Princeton, Brett McConnell, who, if memory serves, his dad is a longtime Rutgers athletics staffer under Schiano. Don't know the situation there intimately enough to know what Schiano and Pikel's staff's relationship is like or whatever. But McConnell has a very good reputation, had a couple, reportedly had a couple D1 offers that he spurned this offseason to stay at Princeton because he's obviously waiting for the next, the right thing and the right move. So he's highly regarded in coaching circles. Was a manager at Rutgers, is right down the road at Princeton. So I would imagine, he'll get, his name will be thrown around. Kevin Boyle, who's the legendary high school coach. I don't know what his connection is to Rutgers. I'm just saying, there's so many names in Jersey, and I don't know that one of them would be called. You'd have to look at Pikel's networks. I mean, it seems like he's had a pretty loyal stable of assistants there for a number of years. So this is a little bit of a new dynamic for him to navigate. And you can kind of. I thought Gino Ford at who I think was his. No, I'm sorry. Jeff Bowles was his successor at Stony Brook, so never mind about that.
Yes, yes.
So yeah, I mean, I don't know. It's does he go back? Does he go to the old UConn tree because he has connections there? Is there somebody? I'm not sure. Do you have any names that you've heard?
Yeah, so I mean, fans definitely want Brett McConnell. He's interviewed in the past. I think he'd be a great fit, not only for just in terms of his recruiting, but the fact that he really offensively at Princeton was intimately involved in that, and Rutgers really does kind of need, I think, a bit of a refresh in terms of vision there offensively. But a few other names. I mean, other Pikel kind of connected names. Actually, Brian Dower, who is a great Jersey high school career, followed Jay Young to Fairfield and started for them at Stony Brook. He's a name that's I think he's going to want.
Where is he now?
He's working for Young at Fairfield.
Oh.
So, but I think he goes with more experience. But one name that's very intriguing that kind of caught me by surprise, and Jerry Carino, who's the dean of the New Jersey and Rutgers basketball beat, reported yesterday. He actually mentioned Talik Brown, former UConn,
who is at Iona.
Who was at Iona as an assistant under Patino and is now director of ops, I believe, for Patino at St. John's. But, I find that intriguing simply because of the style in which Patino ran at Iona and will run at St. John's in terms of, fast-paced. Pikel has, pressed quite a bit last year at times, a good amount unsuccessfully after Moat Mag went down. So I that kind of was intriguing in terms of, hiring. I think there's a lot of ways you can go. I think you can kind of not reinvent things, but definitely kind of change direction a little bit. And I think
so. If you want my honest opinion, like just who he should get, that like would be an interesting hire. I'm also happy to do that. I have so you're talking about offense, and I've been pretty open about this. He's actually come on my podcast. I would strongly recommend it if you're a hoops junkie. And I don't say that about all my episodes because this one is actually sort of not UMass related, but there was a guy in Western Massachusetts circles who led the number one prep team in the country for a number of years, a school named Northfield Mount Herman. They won a national title under him, and they made the national tournament like 10 times, won a zillion games. Guy by the name of John Carroll. And John Carroll, if you talk to anyone in the coaching world, in the same way that there's just, I mean, I wouldn't ever liken him to like a Bobby Hurley or something, but in the prep scene in New England, which is highly regarded, I'm sure you guys have had kids, recruits come out of there. John Carroll is kind of the gold standard. And a year ago, he left. The school was kind of, it seemed like they weren't super invested anymore in being known as just like a basketball factory, because it was actually a really, really highly regarded academic school. And he sent 45 kids to the Ivy League in 15 years, but also kids to Texas and Davidson and Northwestern and Stanford and everywhere, basically UMass and Kansas and North Carolina. And he spent the last year consulting, working with a lot of college programs. He's very well known in the college coaching world, and a lot of places kind of pick his brain for offensive tips. And I now, through all this sort of coaching search stuff I've got into, anytime his name comes up, I talk to, high major assistants and the like, and they're like, that guy should have a statue, like outside of any school that would hire him, they would end up building a statue for him. So I'm pretty sure he has, like, this year he went to like 70 schools. I was kind of tracking it on Instagram a bit after he'd been on my show. I think he stopped by Rutgers and may have an pre-existing relationship with Pike. He does with most of these guys, but his team scored, like, he was doing stuff offensively that was 10, 15 years ahead of its game. But, and this is from people I know who, are at the NBA level now, who describe that, because he had a long kind of apprenticeship program there, where like all the guys who were assistants under him at this tiny prep school are now, prominent agents or NBA, scouts or high level college assistants and the like. So it's not like he's unfamiliar at all in the basketball world. And if you're looking for like someone to inject dynamic offense into what you do, that is honestly the number one name I give. He'll probably end up on a college staff, if I had to guess, within the next, few weeks, because he sort of took a year and was doing a lot of consulting. I think he, that's probably where he goes next. But it seems to me like, just because you got me thinking now, that's kind of been my favorite name in all this. Another name, because now you got me thinking, the guy, what's his name, who was played at Duke, ran the New York Rens. Oh, Andy Borman, who's now a Penny Hardaway assistant at Memphis. He is he's terrific. He ran the New York Rens, the top, arguably the top AAU program in the New York area. I don't know that he would leave Memphis. It seems like a pretty good gig, but he went from the AAU world to there after being, having played at Duke. I think he was a soccer player there too. So his name, I sometimes hear as very, very well regarded in these sorts of circles. So I don't know. I mean, now you really see, this is the topic I'm so immersed in these days. So once my memory starts going, I'm like, oh, now I can give you 10 names. But if it's not McConnell or Young, I think if you want to be interesting and a little outside the box, Borman or Carroll would be really about as good as you're gonna find. And I think that the interesting thing, and I'll tell you another, Joe Mantegna at Blair Academy in Jersey. He's run quite a powerhouse there for some time. Again, I don't know. I think this whole world has given me access to believe that like high level prep coaches are often, when you kind of get in certain circles and people say like who's really good, that's who they're talking about, because they really have had to coach at a high level. And you're dealing with, Northfield Mount Hermon was getting 12 Division I kids every year, who are many of whom are post grad. So it's essentially like a group of college freshmen, right? Like it's not as if he's coaching, Hackensack High or whatever,
Right.
But yeah, I don't know. Now you got me really thinking. If people hit my mentions, I'm happy to weigh in. But yeah,
Well, it's interesting you brought up Carroll, and I have known who he is simply because of what you were saying. I mean, his run and Rutgers does recruit New England prep quite a bit. And TJ Thompson, assistant on staff, ran the it's the Blue Devils. I can't remember I'm missing the full name, but he brought he coached Geo Baker AAU team in New England. And they've recruited the prep schools there for years. So, and Carl Hobbs actually was pretty connected too. So part of I think the circle of this search for Pike, I kind of have heard that that it is a possibility that prep coach could be considered. So I think John.
Yeah,
Carroll's
and Peichel seems like he has a little bit less of an ego and just knows that there are good basketball minds everywhere. And it seems also like you guys have a really dynamic 2024 class kind of already coming in. So maybe at least in the short term, it's not as much about just recruiting, but it's also about, revamping that offense a bit. Yeah, now that you've got me thinking, I mean, Borman or Carroll. Carroll's, if you're talking prep, like that's the guy. The guy at Putnam Science is really good too, but he seems like they've just really got to go in there, and I don't know that he's.
What about Brewster?
Jason Smith at Brewster is outstanding, terrific. I mean, they're almost. It's funny, they're so good. I mean, this has no knock to Jason, but they're the talent they get up there is so preposterously good. Like, just to give you context, that kid I talked about earlier, Javon Garcia, in the who was Noah's running mate and sort of started as a freshman at UMass. He was like the 8th man on a Brewster team that had, I'm pretty sure, 4 or 5 kids in the top 100. That included the late Terrence Clark, who died tragically in a car accident. Went to Kentucky. Mashburn, the Jamal Mashburn kid at Minnesota. I mean, so one of the, with Brewster, it's like truly no knock on Jason Smith. I think he can coach. They just get, Donovan Mitchell went there, and it's like it's so. The UMass has a kid coming this year, a recruit who's 6'11", who's on their B team, and he's a scholarship kid coming to the Atlantic 10, and that's no knock on the kid. It's just they have 9 high major, whatever. I don't know but so Carroll did it a little bit like Peichel, I think, where it's a little bit of more with less still. Obviously Rutgers has grown, and I think that 2024 class marks kind of it sounds like it marks a little bit of the ascendance of Rutgers into a new kind of tier now.
We're hoping.
Yeah, but the point is, Carroll was Carroll, Spike Albrecht played up at NMH for Carroll, and that kid, people don't realize it, but Spike Albrecht was a D2 signee before Beeline showed up, a month with 2 games left in his senior year. I mean, so he just finds kids like that, and that's where it was his bread and butter. So listen to the interview, and I did, if you're interested, because I've done, I've had Calipari and Steve Lapis, who used to coach at UMass, and Frank Martin and everybody, and I don't think there's a more interesting basketball mind that I've had the fortune of interviewing than Carroll. So, maybe that's really interesting. But there's a bunch of good names. So yeah, the prep scene and just, other outside the box names is certainly something to take a look at.
That was great. I really appreciate that. One name before we go, Dave Leto, former head coach, is definitely a long-term relationship guy with Peichel. That I think he just took a job. He actually just replaced Kevin Ali in the overtime elite.
Really? Interesting.
Yeah, so that's a name I think could come back. In this search, we'll see. But so yeah, thank you so much for all your insight. Why don't you tell everybody where they can find your coaching podcast? I will definitely find this John Carroll episode for sure. Now you got me excited, but let everybody know where they can find you and on Twitter and all that.
So Curry Hicks Sage on Twitter. That's a play on Curry Hicks Cage, which was where Dr. J played when he was at UMass. It's a great old barn on the campus, still exists for the track team. And the podcast is the UMass Basketball Podcast, available wherever your podcasts can be found or wherever you get your podcasts. We haven't done one in a while because we've been doing a lot of Twitter Spaces episodes. And so those are kind of just under the hashtag search season, SZN, where we chronicle all things in the college coaching search world. It's hard to explain why. I just find it the most interesting thing in sports, the drama, the palace intrigue. It's just deeply fascinating, the number of factors that are at play in searches. And then sometimes if you could find probably somewhere logged our spaces where it's just me ranting recklessly and irresponsibly after UMass games as well. Those are also out there. But I appreciate you giving me some time, and apologies for excessive length. That tends to be my Achilles heel. So thanks for bearing with me.
Absolutely. I feel like it was meant to be for us to finally talk. We've followed each other on Twitter for a while, and I feel like almost kind of the likeness of each other at our respective schools. So I really appreciate you coming on and all your insight. And I'm sure we'll talk next year during the season when Noah hopefully is a key part to Rutgers going back to the NCAA tournament.
Yeah, and these days I know it's not easy to get a ticket out at the rack. So if anybody has extras, then I'll buy them off you, and I'll come out on NJ Transit for a game. We didn't even talk, by the way, about the fact that Noah hit a buzzer beater against Rutgers last season, 2 seasons ago.
Well, that might have been strategic on my part, but yes, it is funny how full circle, and he played great in that game, obviously. So, but yeah, that buzzer beater was unbelievable, and he's had a few in his career, correct?
Yeah, he had a spectacular one this past season in the second round of a multi-team non-conference tournament down in Myrtle Beach. That was just an absolute stunner to beat Murray State. Noah hits big shots. I mean, there's no doubt about that. He relishes the moment, and it'll be fun to follow him at Rutgers, because I do follow you guys closer than almost any other program just because of proximity to New York, and I like the Rutgers Twitter folks.
I feel like he's got I'm hoping for the parallel with UConn in terms of when they went out and got Tristan Newton, who had I think he scored 25 or 30 points against them a couple of years ago, and then they went out and brought him in, and he obviously was huge for them this year. So I'm hoping for some type of parallel with Noah.
That's high hopes. I mean, given that they won a national title, but I do think Noah's going to be a really good contributor there.
All right, man. Thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it. And we'll talk during the season.
All right. Thanks, buddy. Have a good one.